No ship had ever returned from the dead expanse. Not in 1,000 years. The region of space was a wound in the galaxy, cold, silent, and wrong. Sensors failed inside it. Stars vanished without light. Even unmanned probes were torn apart, as if something inside the darkness rejected existence itself. The Galactic Coalition marked it in every navigation system with a single command: do not enter. So when the Deep Space Monitoring Station K-317 detected a signal coming from inside the dead expanse, the operators assumed it was a malfunction. At first, the signal was weak, old, broken in places, but it was repeating, again, and again, and again. The station's AI attempted to identify it, and froze. That alone was enough to trigger a silent alarm. Technician Ralven leaned closer to the console, his four eyes narrowing as ancient code scrolled across the screen. The signal format was not Coalition standard, not alien either. It was human. Ralven's hands went still. Humans were gone. Everyone knew that. They had burned bright and fast, then vanished centuries ago during the Collapse War. The official record said they were brave but reckless, strong but not strong enough. Their worlds were empty now, their colonies dust. Humanity was history, yet the identifier flashing on the screen was unmistakable. Human military transponder, active. The room grew quiet. Then the mass reading arrived. The station's sensors began screaming warnings. Something was moving inside the dead expanse. Something enormous. At first, it appeared as a distortion, a bend in the darkness itself. Then the computers tried to calculate its size. They failed. Backup systems engaged. Emergency power surged. The object was not a ship. It was a structure, longer than Coalition cities, wider than orbital rings. Its shadow swallowed distant stars as if light itself refused to pass around it. A weapons officer whispered, barely audible, "That's not possible." The signal strengthened. This time, it carried a designation. Human Supercarrier, Last Light. The name struck old fear into those who still remembered ancient war archives. The Last Light was a legend. A rumor buried so deep most believed it was propaganda. According to fragmented records, it was humanity's final command ship, launched during the darkest hour of the Collapse War. It carried millions of crew, entire populations, soldiers, engineers, families. It never returned. Historians marked it as lost, destroyed, or swallowed by the dead expanse along with the enemy it was sent to stop. Yet here it was, returning. The station commander ordered an immediate alert to the Galactic Coalition High Council. Emergency beacons flared across nearby systems. Fleets were scrambled. Still, no one spoke, because another reading appeared. Power signature, active reactors, stable life support, operational. Ralven felt his breath catch. Life support. After centuries. That meant one thing. The ship was not empty. The dead expanse began to change. Darkness folded inward as if pushed aside by force. Space itself seemed to retreat. Then, slowly, impossibly, the massive hull emerged. The supercarrier was scarred. Its armor was cracked and burned black. Entire sections were missing. Deep gouges cut across its surface, as if something had tried, and failed, to tear it apart. Human symbols still marked the hull. Faded. Defiant. Ancient weapon ports rotated into position, not aggressively, but automatically, as if the ship never stopped being ready. Coalition ships arriving at the edge of the system hesitated. None of their weapons could even target something that large properly. Then the signal changed. For the first time, it was no longer automated. A voice cut through the static. Human. Old. Calm. Unidentified vessels, the voice said. Maintain distance. There was a pause. Not technical, but deliberate. Then the words that froze every commander listening. Humanity is still at war. Behind the supercarrier, deep inside the dead expanse, something moved. And the galaxy realized, far too late, that the humans had not disappeared. They had been standing guard in the dark. The Galactic Coalition had faced wars, plagues, and stellar collapse before. It had never faced uncertainty like this. Across 12 core systems, emergency summons activated at once. Council chambers that had not been opened in generations filled with delegates, admirals, historians, and artificial intelligences older than some civilizations. At the center of every display hovered the same image. The human supercarrier Last Light. No one spoke at first. The ship's scale alone crushed conversation. Coalition dreadnoughts looked like escort craft beside it. Its hull was ancient, layered with scars that told stories no archive had ever recorded. A counselor from the Heliox Dominion finally broke the silence. "This is a mistake," she said sharply. "Humans are extinct. Everyone here knows that." A response came immediately. From the archivist AI. Its voice was slower than normal. "Careful. Correction," it said. "Humanity is listed as extinct. That status was never confirmed." Murmurs spread through the chamber. The AI continued, projecting fragmented records into the air. Many were marked redacted. Others were deliberately corrupted. The collapse war, the AI said, was not ended by coalition victory. It was ended by containment. The word unsettled the room. A military commander leaned forward. "Containment of what?" The AI paused. "For centuries," it replied. "This information was restricted to prevent panic. What humanity fought was not an empire, not a species. A new image appeared. Not a ship, not a being. A distortion in space. Something that bent gravity, devoured energy, and left emptiness behind. It was designated only as the Devourer," the AI said. "An entity capable of consuming stars, fleets, and even data itself. Conventional weapons were ineffective. Coalition losses reached catastrophic levels." Silence returned, heavier than before. A historian whispered, "Why don't we remember this?" The AI answered without hesitation. "Because humanity requested that you forget." That statement shook the chamber. Records showed that during the final years of the collapse war, human forces stopped asking for support. They stopped sharing data. They withdrew from coalition command structures entirely. Not in anger, in preparation. Human fleets formed a single defensive line near the dead expanse. Then they vanished. Coalition commanders at the time believed humanity had retreated, fractured, or fallen. The truth was far worse. They volunteered, the AI said, to hold the Devourer at the edge of reality. Permanently. The counselor from Heliox stood abruptly. "That is impossible. No species could survive such a mission." The AI adjusted the image. "That assumption," it said, "was incorrect." The last light transmitted again. This time, it sent data. Internal schematics flooded coalition systems, not weapon designs, but ship life records. Generations. Human names layered over centuries. Birth logs. Training rotations. Deaths marked quietly, without ceremony. The crew of the last light had not been frozen in time. They had lived there. Children learned to walk in gravity sections reinforced for combat. Teenagers trained beside elders who remembered Earth only from stories. Every human aboard was raised with one certainty. They were the wall. Aboard the Supercarrier, the lights dimmed slightly as power rerouted. Inside, Captain Mara Cade stood on the command deck. Her hair was gray. Her uniform was patched and reinforced with materials unknown to coalition science. Her eyes never left the tactical display. Behind her, the Devourer pressed against the edge of containment space. It did not strike wildly. It learned. "It's testing again," an officer said. Mara nodded once. "It always does before a push." A junior crew member hesitated. "Captain, coalition fleets are forming up. They don't understand." "They don't need to," Mara said calmly. "Just make sure they stay out of range." On the edge of the system, coalition admirals argued. Weapons officers demanded permission to fire. Political leaders demanded answers. Religious delegates whispered prayers. The last light did not acknowledge any of it. Instead, the Supercarrier began deploying structures. Massive, ring-like constructs unfolded from its hull and anchored into space itself. Energy flowed through them, stabilizing the area around the dead expanse. Coalition scientists stared in disbelief. "They're reinforcing space-time," one whispered. "Not attacking." Then something went wrong. Sensors spiked. The Devourer surged forward. Not fully, but enough. A coalition cruiser on the outer edge of the formation vanished. No explosion. No debris. Just absence. Where the ship had been, there was nothing. Panic exploded across command channels. Weapons fired reflexively. Beams, missiles, and kinetic rounds slammed into the Devourer's distortion. None of them mattered. The entity shifted its focus. Toward the coalition fleet. The last light moved instantly. For the first time, its weapons fired. Not at the Devourer. At space itself. A blinding lattice of force wrapped around the entity, pushing it back, sealing the breach it had forced open. The energy output dwarfed anything the Coalition possessed. The Devourer recoiled, not in pain, in recognition. Coalition commanders realized something terrifying. The enemy knew the human ship. It remembered it. Captain Mara exhaled slowly. Containment integrity at 87%, an officer reported. That's better than last century, Mara replied. She opened a channel to the Coalition. Her face appeared across thousands of screens. Human, tired, unbroken. We are not here to threaten you, she said. We are here because you are standing in the wrong place. A Coalition admiral found his voice. You expect us to believe you've been holding that thing back alone? Mara met his gaze. We asked for volunteers, she said. No one else stepped forward. She paused. We didn't blame you. Behind her, alarms sounded. Containment stress rising. The Devourer pushed again. Harder. Mara closed the channel. Battle stations, she ordered softly. The last light turned, not away from the enemy, but toward it. Coalition sensors screamed warnings as the human supercarrier moved deeper into the dead expanse, dragging the Devourer's attention with it. One realization spread through every command center at once. If the humans failed now, there would be no second line. And the galaxy had forgotten how to fight what humans never stopped fighting. The last light crossed the boundary of the dead expanse again. Coalition sensors struggled to follow it. Space inside the region behaved differently. Distance bent, time jittered, and physics obeyed rules no modern science fully understood. To the Coalition fleets watching from the outside, the supercarrier looked like it was sailing into a grave. To the humans aboard, it felt like coming home. Captain Mara Cade stood unmoving as the stars twisted around the hull. The command deck was silent except for low alarms and steady breathing. No panic, no shouting. Every crew member already knew their role. They always did. Containment rings synced, said the navigation officer. Space-time tension rising but stable. Mara nodded. Bring us to Holding Line Alpha. The words carried weight. Holding Line Alpha was not a coordinate. It was a promise. Deep within the supercarrier, massive chambers activated. Rows of human soldiers stood from their stations, securing armor older than most civilizations. Their suits were scarred, repaired countless times, each marked with names, some crossed out, some added. None of them spoke. They did not need speeches. They had grown up listening to the hum of containment fields. They had learned history from scars in the walls, not books. Every human aboard knew the same truth. If the Devourer crossed the line, nothing would stop it. The enemy shifted. Coalition scientists watching remotely struggled to describe what they were seeing. The Devourer was not a shape, but a presence. It bent light, drained energy, and erased matter by existing too close to it. But now it hesitated. For the first time in centuries, it did not advance immediately. It was studying the last light, learning what had changed. A Coalition admiral whispered, "It's afraid." Another corrected him. "No, it remembers." Inside the dead expanse, the Devourer struck. Reality screamed. Containment fields flared as entire sections of space collapsed inward. The supercarrier shuddered, armor groaning as ancient stress fractures widened. Impact across sectors 7 through 12. Energy loss at forward rings. Enemy adapting faster than predicted. Mara did not raise her voice. Activate Pattern Atlas. A pause. Then a young officer stiffened. Captain, Pattern Atlas was archived. Coalition law. Mara turned her head slightly. We stopped following Coalition law 500 years ago, she said. Activate it. Deep in the ship's core, systems long untouched awakened. Pattern Atlas was not a weapon. It was a method. Human engineers, centuries ago, had realized something the rest of the galaxy never accepted. The Devourer did not break the laws of physics. It exploited them. So humanity rewrote the rules locally. Not permanently, not cleanly, but enough. The space around the supercarrier shifted. Angles stopped making sense. Distances compressed. The Devourer lashed out and struck empty nothingness where the ship had been a moment earlier. Coalition observers gasped. The last light was no longer fully present in normal space. It's phasing, a scientist whispered. But not disappearing. No, another replied in horror. It's overlapping realities. The Devourer recoiled violently. For the first time, it took damage. Not physical damage. Structural damage to its existence. Inside the ship, alarms intensified. Reality strain at critical levels. Crew exposure exceeding safety margins. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Rotate teams, she ordered. Limit exposure to 5 minutes per shift. An officer hesitated. Captain, you know what prolonged exposure does. I do, Mara replied. She had watched friends age decades in minutes. She had buried people who simply unraveled. The price of bending reality was paid in human bodies. And humanity had decided long ago it was worth it. The Devourer screamed. Not with sound, but with distortion so intense coalition ships lost sensor lock entirely. Several systems shut down automatically to prevent data corruption. A coalition commander shouted, "We can't even observe the fight." "That's the point," muttered an old historian. This war was never meant to be seen. Inside the last light, human Marines advanced into containment corridors as breaches opened. Not to fight the Devourer directly. That was impossible, but to repair space itself. They deployed anchor devices, driving them into fractures in reality, stabilizing the battlefield through sheer stubborn engineering. One Marine laughed as gravity flipped sideways. "Guess we're walking on walls again." Another replied, "Better than last time." They sealed a rupture just as a section of corridor vanished behind them. No hesitation. No regret. Outside, the coalition fleet was no longer ignored. The Devourer, pressured by the humans, lashed outward blindly. A wave of distortion surged toward the watching armada. Coalition shields failed instantly. Entire squadrons vanished. Panic erupted. "Fall back. Emergency jump. We can't outrun it." The last light interposed itself. The Supercarrier took the wave head-on. Armor plates vaporized. Internal systems failed across multiple decks. Casualty reports flooded command. Mara clenched her fists. "Hold formation," she said. "Do not let it reach them." A comm officer looked up, eyes wide. "Captain, if we take another hit like that." "We won't," Mara said quietly. She opened a channel to all hands. Her voice carried through every corridor, every damaged compartment, every battlefield pocket. "This is Captain Cade," she said. "The Devourer is testing our limits. That means it hasn't found them yet." A pause. "You know the drill. Hold the line." No cheers followed. Just confirmations. Across the ship, humans braced. Coalition observers finally understood. This was not a battle meant to be won. It was a battle meant to be endured. The Devourer struck again. Harder. Reality bent toward collapse. Containment integrity fell rapidly. 60%. 55. "Captain, we can't sustain this." Mara stared at the display. She had been born on the last light. So had her parents. So had her grandparents. This ship was not just metal. It was a promise passed down through blood. "Prepare secondary line," she ordered. An officer froze. "Captain, secondary line means." "I know what it means." Secondary line was deeper in the dead expanse. More dangerous. Less stable. Closer to the Devourer's origin. It was a move no human captain had made in over a century. Coalition commanders watching realized what was happening. "They're advancing," one whispered. "They're not retreating." Another shook their head slowly. "They never do." The last light surged forward, dragging the Devourer with it, pulling the battle away from inhabited space. Alarm screamed. Crew members strapped in, knowing some sections would not survive the transition. As the ship crossed into the deeper darkness, one final realization settled over the watching galaxy. Humanity was not defending the coalition. They were protecting it from the truth. And if the humans failed here, there would be no warning next time. Only silence. The deeper regions of the dead expanse did not welcome intruders. As the last light crossed the secondary line, space twisted violently around its hull. Entire stars seemed to smear into streaks of dim light. Time itself hesitated, then lurched forward in uneven pulses. Inside the Supercarrier, artificial gravity faltered. Crew members grabbed handholds as decks tilted. Emergency lights snapped on across damaged sections, bathing corridors in red. Still, no one screamed. They had grown up with moments like this. "Stability at 49%, reported the systems officer. "Hull stress beyond rated limits." Captain Mara Cade did not look away from the tactical display. "Redirect power from non-essential sectors," she said. "Preserve habitation rings and containment arrays." A quiet acknowledgement followed. Non-essential sectors included museums, memorial halls, and education decks. places where the history of humanity had been carefully preserved aboard the ship, places filled with names. As systems powered down, lights faded in long corridors where human history lived on walls of engraved metal. Children's handprints, old flags, messages etched by crews who knew they would never see another sky. One inscription read simply, "We stayed." A young engineer named Elias paused as the lights dimmed around him. He pressed a gloved hand to the wall, steadying himself. His grandmother's name was carved there. So was his mother's. Elias had been born on the last light. Like everyone else, he had learned to read by tracing letters cut into steel by shaking hands centuries ago. He whispered, "We're still here." Then the gravity snapped back on, and he returned to his station. On the command deck, Mara felt the ship's pain through subtle vibrations beneath her boots. Every groan of stressed metal felt familiar. The last light was old, older than most stars the Coalition still charted. Yet it held, because it was never built to be comfortable. It was built to endure. Behind the Supercarrier, the Devourer followed. Not mindlessly, carefully. Coalition observers, their sensors barely functioning at this depth, noticed something unsettling. The enemy was no longer attacking at random. It was probing, learning where the human defenses weakened. "It's adapting faster than before," a scientist said, voice tight with fear. "Much faster." A military advisor responded grimly. "It's been fighting humans for centuries. Of course it's learning." Inside the last light, a containment alarm shrieked. Breach forming in Sector 14. Reality cohesion collapsing. Mara turned. "Seal the sector." A lieutenant hesitated. "Captain, there are still people inside." Mara's jaw tightened. "How many?" 32, the lieutenant said. "Engineering and maintenance." The Devourer pressed harder against the weakening area. Space began to fold inward, walls stretching into impossible shapes. If the breach spread, it would tear through the ship's core. Mara closed her eyes for half a second. "Lock the bulkheads," she ordered. The command deck went still. "That's an order," she repeated. Bulkhead doors slammed shut, isolating Sector 14. 32 life signs vanished from internal sensors as the section collapsed into nothingness. No explosion, no debris, just absence. A junior officer swallowed hard. They didn't even have time. "They knew," Mara said quietly. "They always know." On a nearby screen, casualty numbers updated automatically. No one commented. The Devourer recoiled slightly, confused. It had fed, but not enough. Inside the sealed-off sector, 32 humans had chosen not to fight the breach. They had fought time. Their last action had been to overload stabilizers, buying the ship precious seconds. Coalition command channels erupted. "They just sacrificed their own crew," one delegate shouted. A human historian, long silent, finally spoke. "No," she said softly. "They fulfilled their duty." The last light surged forward again, deeper into hostile space. Containment fields strained as power rerouted through ancient conduits patched hundreds of times. Systems designed for decades of use had endured centuries. Not because they were perfect, but because humans refused to abandon them. On the lower habitation decks, families huddled together as tremors shook the ship. Children held on to elders who remembered earlier battles. A child asked, "Is it worse this time?" An old man smiled gently. "No, just different." "Are we going to die?" "Maybe," the man replied honestly. "But not today." The Devourer struck again. This time, it targeted the people. A wave of distortion bypassed external defenses and rippled through internal space. Crew members screamed as gravity twisted, bones bending under impossible forces. Medical teams rushed in as reality stabilized. Exposure casualties climbed. Mara watched the numbers. "Too fast." "Captain," said the medical officer, "we can't keep rotating crews at this rate. Long-term exposure is accelerating cellular breakdown." Mara nodded slowly. "I know." She opened a secure channel. "Activate Protocol Hearth." The words rippled through the ship like a held breath. Protocol Hearth had not been used in generations. Across the Supercarrier, volunteers stepped forward. Not soldiers, not engineers, civilians, teachers, caretakers, artists, people who had lived their entire lives in the shadow of this war without ever standing on the front line. They reported calmly to designated stations. Coalition observers were confused. "What are they doing?" one asked. A human analyst answered quietly. They're reinforcing the crew. Protocol Hearth allowed untrained humans to temporarily integrate with ship systems, to lend neural processing, instinct, and biological stability to failing containment arrays. It was dangerous, often fatal, but it worked. Across the last light, systems stabilized as human minds filled the gaps machines could not. The Devourer faltered again. It had learned how humans fought. It had not expected how deeply they were willing to bleed. On the command deck, Mara felt the ship steady. Containment integrity rose. Slowly, painfully, but it rose. Coalition admirals watched in stunned silence. One finally whispered, "They're not just a crew." Another answered, "They're a civilization." The Devourer began to retreat. Not far, not fully, but enough. Mara exhaled. "Status," she said. "Containment holding at 52%, came the reply. "Enemy pressure reduced." Mara nodded. "It's regrouping." She knew this pattern. The Devourer always withdrew before its worst strikes. She turned to her officers. "Log today's losses," she said, "and update the memorial." A pause. "Yes, Captain." As the last light held its position in the dark, coalition leaders finally understood something that history had failed to teach them. Humanity had not survived this war because they were stronger. They survived because they accepted a truth no other species could. That survival was not about winning. It was about standing long enough for others to live. And somewhere beyond the edge of broken space, the Devourer watched, learning, preparing, because for the first time in centuries, it had found something that would not break. The Devourer did not retreat far. It never did. In the deep darkness beyond the last light, space trembled with slow, patient movement. The entity was gathering itself, folding layers of broken reality inward like muscles tightening before a strike. Coalition sensors, damaged and unreliable at this depth, still picked up one clear pattern. The enemy was changing. "It's not testing anymore," a coalition analyst said quietly. "It's preparing." Across the command deck of the last light, alarms reflected that same truth. Energy fluctuations spiked and stabilized in repeating cycles. Containment fields strained in rhythms the crew had learned to fear. Captain Mara Cade studied the projections. "It has found the line," she said. An officer looked up. "Captain, the line we cannot let it cross," Mara explained. "It always does." The dead expanse pulsed. Then the Devourer struck. Not as a wave, not as a surge, but as a focus. A narrow corridor of annihilation tore through space, aimed not at the ship's armor, but at its core systems. Targeting spine sections. Energy levels spiking beyond modeled limits. Containment failure imminent. The last light shuddered violently. Several decks lost gravity entirely. Crew members slammed into bulkheads as emergency clamps engaged. On the outer hull, armor layers peeled away under forces that did not burn or cut, but unmade. Mara gripped the command rail. "All hands," she said calmly, "brace for impact. Reinforce core alignment." The Devourer's attack slammed into the ship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then internal space twisted. Corridors folded into curves. Floors became walls. Walls became void. Entire compartments stretched thin, like reflections in broken glass. Engineering teams fought through shifting geometry to reach stabilizers that refused to stay in one place. Section 9 collapsing. Manual override failing. "We're losing the core." Mara turned to her tactical officer. "Deploy Anchor Group 3. The officer hesitated. "Captain, Anchor Group 3 hasn't been fully tested." Mara's eyes did not leave the display. "Neither has extinction," she replied. "Deploy it." Deep within the ship, human engineers activated devices never meant for routine use. Anchor Group 3 did not stabilize space. It pinned it. Massive gravitic spikes drove into fractured reality, forcing space-time to behave through sheer pressure. The cost was immediate. Power drains skyrocketed. Systems across the ship dimmed. Life support in non-critical zones shut down. Dozens of compartments went dark. But the core held. The Devourer recoiled, sharply. Coalition observers gasped as their sensors briefly regained clarity. The enemy's distortion rippled outward, unstable for the first time. "It heard it," a scientist whispered. They actually heard it. Inside the last light, the victory was brief. Containment integrity stalled at 48%, then began to drop again. Medical bays overflowed. Exposure casualties increased as reality strain leaked through protective fields. People aged, bled, and broke under forces no body was meant to endure. A medical officer approached Mara, voice shaking. "Captain, we're running out of volunteers for Protocol Hearth. Civilian reserves are depleted." Mara closed her eyes. She had known this moment would come. "How many left?" she asked. "Only active crew," the officer replied. "And command staff." The Devourer gathered itself again. This time, it turned its attention away from the last light, toward the Coalition fleets. "No," Mara whispered. Coalition commanders saw it too late. The entity expanded outward, bypassing the Supercarrier's position, slipping through weakened containment edges. A wave of annihilation surged toward inhabited space. Coalition ships scattered in panic. Weapons fired uselessly. Entire formations vanished. Screams flooded command channels. Mara straightened. "All remaining power to forward arrays," she ordered. "We intercept." An officer stared at her. "Captain, if we do that, the ship won't survive another hit." Mara met his eyes. "Then it won't," she said. The last light surged forward, engines screaming as they pushed beyond safe limits. The Supercarrier placed itself directly between the Devourer and the fleeing fleets. It was not enough. The enemy pressed harder, tearing at the ship's flanks. Hull breaches multiplied. Casualty counts blurred into meaningless numbers. Mara opened a ship-wide channel. "This is Captain Cade," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The line is breaking." Across the ship, people stopped what they were doing. They listened. "We are the last barrier," Mara continued. "If we fail, there will be no one left to remember us." She paused. "If you are still able, report to your stations." No order followed. No demand. Just truth. Responses flooded in. From engineers bleeding in damaged corridors. From medics holding failing bodies together. From officers who could barely stand. Reporting. 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 The Devourer struck again. This time, the last light did not block it alone. Coalition ships, watching the human sacrifice, turned back. Against orders. Against logic. They formed a broken line behind the Supercarrier. Weapons fired in unison. They did little damage, but they distracted the enemy. Bought seconds. Mara watched the display, stunned. "They came back," an officer whispered. Mara nodded slowly. "Then we hold," she said. But the Devourer adapted instantly. It lashed out, tearing through Coalition ships like paper. The line disintegrated. Only the last light remained. Containment integrity plunged. 35%. 30. 28. "Captain," said the chief engineer, voice raw, "we cannot stabilize this. There is only one option left." Mara knew which one. She turned toward the core display. Protocol Dawn. The final measure. A controlled collapse of the ship's reality field, powerful enough to drag the Devourer with it into non-existence. It had been designed centuries ago, and it had never been used. Because no one survived it. Mara took a long breath. "Begin dawn preparations," she said softly. The command deck went silent. An officer finally spoke. "Captain, should we inform the Coalition?" Mara considered it. Then she shook her head. "They don't need another burden," she said. "They've carried enough of our silence." As systems began redirecting for Protocol Dawn, the Devourer sensed the change. It reacted violently. Reality screamed. The last light groaned under forces that would have shattered planets. Mara stood tall at the center of the storm. She had never seen Earth. Never seen open sky. Never known a life without alarms. But she had known purpose. Containment dropped to 20%. Dawn sequence at 40%, reported the systems officer. The Devourer surged one final time, pouring everything it had into breaking through. The ship's lights flickered. Power failed across multiple decks. Crew members held on to each other as gravity vanished entirely. Mara placed her hand on the command rail. "Hold," she whispered. "Not to the ship. Not to the crew. To humanity itself." The last light burned. And somewhere, deep in the darkness, the Devourer finally understood. This was not a species that would ever stop. Even at the end, the last light did not scream as it died. It endured. Protocol Dawn spread through the Supercarrier like a slow, deliberate breath. Systems that had been patched and repatched over centuries aligned for a single purpose. Power rerouted away from shields, engines, and weapons, flowing instead into the ship's deepest layers. into the place where reality was thinnest. On the command deck, the tactical display faded to a single symbol. A human mark. Simple. Old. Meaning, stand. Dawn sequence at 52%, the systems officer reported. Captain Mara Cade nodded once. Around her, the command crew remained at their stations. Some were injured. Some were barely conscious. None asked to leave. They all knew what Protocol Dawn meant. It was not a weapon. It was an ending. Deep inside the Supercarrier, the core chamber awakened for the first time in centuries. Massive containment rings spun slowly, glowing with energies no modern civilization dared to harness. Human engineers had once called this place the anchor of everything, not because it held the ship together, but because it held space together. When Dawn completed, the last light would collapse its own reality field inward, dragging everything bound to it into a controlled void, including the Devourer. It would not explode. It would be erased, along with every human aboard. In the medical bays, doctors stopped fighting the impossible. There was no point anymore. Instead, they sat with the wounded, held hands, spoke softly. A nurse named Lien crouched beside a man whose body flickered, half-phased from reality exposure. He smiled weakly when he saw her. "Did we hold?" he asked. "Yes," Lien said. "We held." "Good," he replied and closed his eyes. On the habitation decks, families gathered in open spaces where gravity still worked. Elders told old stories, not of Earth, but of the ship itself. How the corridors once echoed with laughter. How gardens had grown under artificial suns. How children used to race through zero-gravity shafts before the war grew worse. A child looked up at her mother. "Is it over now?" Her mother hesitated. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said gently. "It will be." Across the ship, final messages were recorded. Not warnings. Not pleas. Stories. Human voices spoke in as simple recorders, knowing the galaxy might one day hear them. They spoke of love, of stubborn hope, of the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. One message, recorded by an engineer with grease still on his hands, ended with a quiet laugh. "We weren't heroes," he said. "We just didn't like bullies." Outside the last light, the Devourer sensed the shift. For the first time since its arrival in this reality, it reacted with something like urgency. It surged forward, distortion tearing violently at the Supercarrier's failing hull. Entire sections peeled away, vanishing as space collapsed behind them. Containment integrity plummeted. 30%. 25. Dawn at 70%. The Devourer pressed harder, wrapping itself around the ship like a tidal wave of nothingness. Coalition observers, watching from the very edge of sensor range, finally understood what was happening. "They're not fighting anymore," a commander whispered. "They're finishing." Emergency channels lit up. Coalition admirals attempted to open communication. "Human vessel, respond. This is a direct order. Please." The last light did not answer. Inside, Captain Mara Cade removed her command insignia and placed it on the console. She turned to her crew. "Thank you," she said simply. No one saluted. They didn't need to. The ship shuddered as the Devourer breached the outer containment layer. Reality screamed, folding inward toward the core chamber. Mara felt the pressure in her bones, in her blood, in the memories passed down through generations. She had been born for this moment. So had they all. Dawn at 90%, the systems officer said, voice barely audible. The Devourer struck the core. For a fraction of a second, the galaxy held its breath. Then the last light pulled inward. Not violently, purposefully. Space collapsed around the ship in a perfect, terrible symmetry. Light bent inward, spiraling toward a point that should not exist. The Devourer was caught mid-launch. It tried to escape. It failed. For the first time in recorded history, the entity did not adapt. It did not learn. It was dragged, screaming silently, into the collapsing reality field alongside the human supercarrier. Coalition sensors overloaded, then went quiet. Where the last light had been, there was nothing. No debris, no radiation, no distortion, just empty, stable space. The dead expanse was gone. The region that had haunted the galaxy for 1,000 years smoothed itself out, stars returning to their rightful places as if nothing had ever been wrong. Coalition fleets drifted in stunned silence. Someone whispered, "They're gone." Another replied, "No, they finished it." Days later, exploration probes entered the former expanse. They found no trace of the devourer, no trace of the last light. But they did find something else. Scattered across the region were faint, repeating data echoes, harmless, stable, and unmistakably human. Messages, stories, names. The Coalition High Council convened an emergency session. This time, no one argued. Humanity was officially declared guardians of the threshold. Every record previously sealed was opened. Every human world was marked as sacred. Every species was ordered to learn the truth, not of a war, but of a choice. Monuments were built across the galaxy, all bearing the same inscription, translated into thousands of languages. They stood where no one else would, so we would never have to. Yet, even as the galaxy mourned, something unexpected happened. In distant systems, long-range sensors detected anomalies. Not threats. Signals. Weak. Familiar. Human. The echoes left behind by Protocol Dawn were doing something no one predicted. They were stabilizing space, strengthening reality itself. The sacrifice of the last light had not just ended the war. It had changed the rules of the universe. And somewhere, in the quiet after the storm, the galaxy began to understand the final truth humanity had lived by. Even in death, humans build walls so others can sleep. The galaxy did not celebrate. It did not know how. For the first time in recorded history, the greatest threat to existence had ended without victory parades, without conquered worlds, without a single species claiming credit. There was only silence. Coalition fleets remained where the last light had vanished, drifting in orderly formation around empty space. Engines idled. Weapons powered down. No one gave the order to leave, because no one felt worthy of moving on. Scans confirmed it again and again. The Devourer was gone. The dead expanse was gone. The human supercarrier was gone. What remained was a region of space so stable that instruments recalibrated themselves in confusion. Gravity behaved perfectly. Time flowed smoothly. Even background radiation dropped to levels unseen in millennia. Reality itself felt reinforced. A coalition science director finally spoke. "This sector is stronger than surrounding space," she said slowly, as if something was bracing it. The idea spread quietly. Humanity had not only destroyed the enemy, they had reinforced the universe. In the days that followed, coalition probes began to detect the echoes. At first, they were dismissed as residual noise. Data artifacts, ghost signals from collapsed systems. But the echoes repeated, always in human format, always structured, always intentional. They were not messages sent outward. They were left behind. Engineers isolated one echo and decoded it carefully. When the signal played, the room fell silent. A human voice spoke, calm, unafraid. "If you're hearing this, then it worked." The recording paused, as if the speaker had smiled. "That means you're safe. Or safer than you were." More echoes followed. Thousands of them. They were not military logs. They were journals. Fragments of lives lived aboard the last light across centuries. A woman describing the first time she saw the artificial sunrise. A child explaining how gravity felt when it failed. A man laughing about fixing the same conduit for the 12th time. They spoke of boredom, of fear, of love. They spoke of the enemy too, but never with hatred. Only with resolve. One message, recorded by Captain Mara Cade years before the final battle, spread faster than all the others. "We don't think of ourselves as heroes," she said. "Heroes leave. They come home. They are remembered while they live. We chose something else. We chose to stay." The Coalition High Council convened again. This time, the chamber was full. Every member species attended. Even those who had never fought in the Collapse War. Even those who had once voted to abandon humanity. No one argued. No one postured. The oldest counselor stood, voice unsteady. "We called them reckless," he said. "We called them unstable. We said they burned too bright to matter." He looked at the projection of empty space where the last light had stood. "They burned so we would not." The council voted unanimously. Humanity was granted a status no species had ever held. Perpetual honorary sovereignty. Every human world, ruined or not, was declared protected. No exploitation. No colonization. No erasure. Human symbols were added to coalition flags. Not as decoration. As warning. Across the galaxy, memorials rose. Not statues of warriors, but walls. Simple walls engraved with names. Millions of names. Coalition citizens stood before them in silence, reading unfamiliar human languages, tracing letters carved by hands long gone. Children asked their parents, why didn't they run? No answer ever felt enough. As months passed, something else became clear. The echoes were changing. They were not fading. They were growing. The stabilized region left behind by Protocol Dawn began to expand slowly, almost imperceptibly. Space near the former dead expanse became calmer, safer, more predictable. Hyperlanes shifted, smoothing out dangerous turbulence that had plagued travel for centuries. Coalition scientists struggled to explain it. A human physicist, one of the last off-ship survivors, long assumed irrelevant, finally spoke. They used themselves as anchors, she said. Not metaphorically. Physically. She gestured to the data. Human neural patterns, emotional responses, decision-making instincts, they were woven into the collapse. Their sacrifice imprinted stability into the fabric of space. The room went quiet. You're saying, someone began. Yes, she finished. Humanity is literally holding reality together. Even now, a tremor of shame rippled through the chamber. They had benefited from humanity's sacrifice for centuries without knowing. Now they were benefiting even after humanity was gone. Then came the anomaly. At the edge of the stabilized region, a coalition survey ship detected a new signal. Weak, regular, human. At first, panic returned. But this signal was different. It did not come from the echoes. It came from within stabilized space. Exploration drones followed it carefully. What they found should not have been possible. A structure. Small. Crude. Human. A listening post. Built from debris. From fragments of the last light that should not have survived. Inside, power flickered. Life support functioned at minimal levels. And at its center, a recording device activated when the drones approached. A familiar voice spoke. Older. Rougher. But unmistakably human. If you're hearing this, the voice said, then you're probably wondering how we're still here. The galaxy held its breath. The answer is simple, the voice continued. We aren't. Not really. The recording explained. Protocol Dawn had erased the last light from normal reality. But a handful of crew, those at the deepest core, had been displaced, not destroyed. Scattered. Bound to stabilized space itself. They were no longer fully human. No longer fully physical. But they were aware. Watching. Guarding. We can't leave, the voice said. And we wouldn't if we could. Someone has to stay. The recording ended. Coalition leaders were stunned. Humanity had not vanished. It had transformed. Not into gods. Not into rulers. Into sentinels. The listening post continued transmitting. Not commands. Not threats. A single repeating phrase. Containment stable. Stand down. Live well. Across the galaxy, something shifted. Fear eased. Borders softened. Wars were delayed, then abandoned. Because everyone now understood the same truth. If humans had been willing to endure that much for strangers, then perhaps the galaxy could learn to endure a little for itself. Yet in the deep dark beyond known space, faint disturbances stirred. Not the devourer. Something else. Older. Watching the stabilized region with interest. And for the first time since the beginning of recorded history, the galaxy was not alone. But this time, it was not unguarded. Because humanity was still standing. Even now, the galaxy did not return to normal. It returned to something new. In the years following the disappearance of the last light, borders softened. Fleets stood down. Old rivalries lost their urgency. It was not peace born of trust. It was peace born of memory. Every species remembered the same thing. When the universe broke, humans stood in the fracture and refused to move. The stabilized region continued to expand, slowly and steadily, like a quiet tide. Trade routes adjusted around it. Scientists mapped it. Philosophers argued about it. But no one claimed it. It was known simply as the human line. No ships crossed it without permission. No weapons were tested near it. No wars were planned that might endanger it. Not because anyone enforced the rule. Because no one dared dishonor it. Coalition academies rewrote their histories. The collapse war was no longer taught as a victory, but as a failure survived. Children learned the truth early. The galaxy existed because someone else paid the cost. Human echoes still whispered through stabilized space. Not words anymore, impressions. Feelings. A sense of weight and presence that made even hardened admirals lower their voices when they passed nearby. Explorers reported the same experience. A pressure, not threatening, not welcoming, just steady, as if something was watching, not to judge, but to hold. The listening post discovered in the debris field became sacred ground. No one dismantled it. No one claimed its technology. Coalition engineers maintained it gently, preserving its function without changing a single line of human code. The message never changed. Containment stable. Stand down. Live well. It became a greeting, a farewell, a promise. Years later, a coalition summit was held at the edge of the human line. Representatives from hundreds of species attended in person, not holograms, not proxies. The oldest living counselor stood before the assembly. "We owe a debt," he said plainly, "not one that can be repaid." Silence followed. "So we will carry it." The summit ratified a single, galaxy-wide doctrine, the doctrine of endurance. It was simple. No civilization would ever again ask another to stand alone in the dark. No threat would be dismissed because it was inconvenient. No species would be called expendable. Not after humanity. Military budgets shifted. Exploration focused inward, strengthening worlds instead of conquering new ones. First contact protocols changed, not to dominate, but to listen. And slowly, quietly, the galaxy grew stronger. But the universe is old, and it does not forget. Beyond the mapped edges of space, ancient observers took notice. They were not like the devourer. They did not consume. They measured. They had watched countless civilizations rise and fall, watched galaxies burn themselves out through arrogance or fear. This one intrigued them. A species that chose extinction over abandonment. A civilization that used sacrifice as infrastructure. They watched the human line expand. They felt the stability ripple outward. One observer spoke, its thoughts folding across dimensions. "This region resists entropy." Another replied, "It is reinforced." By what force? The answer took time. By will. For the first time in eons, the observers hesitated. Not because they feared humanity, but because they understood it. And understanding made them cautious. On a quiet coalition world far from the former dead expanse, a child stood on a balcony, staring at the stars. Her species had never met a human, never heard their voices outside recordings. She asked her parent, "Are they really gone?" The parent thought carefully. "No," they said. "They're just elsewhere." "Do they watch us?" "Yes." "Why?" The parent smiled sadly. "Because they promised." The child nodded, satisfied. That night, she dreamed of a great wall of light at the edge of the universe. Not a barrier, a support. Something holding the sky up so it would not fall. Decades passed. Then centuries. The human line continued to expand, slowly knitting reality into something more resilient. Space storms weakened. Anomalies stabilized. Entire regions once deemed unsafe became habitable. Civilizations flourished in the quiet that followed. And through it all, the echoes remained. Not louder, not clearer, but constant. Then, one day, something new happened. At the far edge of stabilized space, sensors detected an intrusion. Not violent, not hostile, curious. Coalition fleets mobilized, cautiously this time, not in panic. As they approached, a familiar sensation washed over them. Pressure, stillness, resolve. The intrusion stopped. It did not advance. Human echoes intensified slightly, not as a warning, but as a presence. Coalition commanders understood. Whatever lay beyond had felt the same thing the devourer once had. A line that would not break. The intrusion withdrew. No battle was fought. No sacrifice was demanded. Humanity had already paid enough. In the High Council chamber, a new inscription was added beneath the old memorial. It read, "They were not the strongest. They were not the oldest. They were not the last. They were the ones who stayed." And across the galaxy, whenever a fleet held position instead of retreating, whenever a leader chose protection over profit, whenever a species refused to abandon another, they called it doing it the human way. The universe continued. Fragile, dangerous, beautiful. But now, when it bent under pressure, it bent around something unyielding. A legacy forged not in conquest, but in endurance. Humanity had vanished from history, but it had become part of reality itself. And as long as the stars burned, and space remembered how to hold together, the galaxy would never forget the species that stood in the dark and said, "Not past this line."